Hello, Georgia. Are my arms placed perfectly on this image or what? Hey, you know what? I might as well sing a song called Why Georgia. It's by John Mayer. You guys ready? Okay, here we go. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. Let's scoot my face down here, a little boot scoot and boogie with my photo. And we have a great session. Now, if you've seen me present in the past, there's brand new stuff I put in here, and always with new ideas, always with new ways to help. So that's really the idea behind this, is how to write NeuroAffirming IEP goals. But actually, I mentioned teens and tweens, but this can be for any age that you're working with. So if you're with elementary school aged kids, this works great too. I'm going to be providing specific scenarios that I've encountered for the fall semester and how I approach those situations. And over the course of my career as an SLP, these types of situations that I'll share with you pop up. I don't want to say all the time, but definitely they're going to resonate with you. And then you can do what you want with these stories. But we're first going to dive into who I am, so you have a little bit of background knowledge if you don't know who I am. And we are also going to really tie this into make it effective. So that way, when you're done watching this, you have some go-to IEP goals. You're like, all right, I'm just going to copy and paste this one and use it. Things like that, right? Like, my job is to give you information without diving too much into the history of this and that. And just like, hey, I want the scoop, like, give it to me, right? So that's what I want for you. And also ways that we can track the goals. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Growing up, I'm an ADHDer. So school was a bit of a challenge for me for many situations, but more specifically, staying seated, following along with the teacher, getting work done, which is a very difficult thing for me currently. Like, I'm bombarded with emails and messages and a to-do list and IEPs it's hard to just get the thing done. And so I also have children of my own. I have 5 boys, all under the age of 10. So it's my hockey team, right? A hockey team, I think, has 5 on the ice. I could be wrong about that, but I'm on social media as Speech Dude. I have been working in the school setting for 23 years now. So part of that is my first 3 years, I received a master's degree with emphasis in mild moderate disabilities. So I was in special ed as a teacher. The greatest part about all of that is that I dove in before we were able to email parents and to fill out forms online, where it was like basically a PDF. We would have like a PDF IEP Pro program that we would use in our district, and we would print it out, and we would handwrite things in the IEP. So the nice thing is that you can see the discussions and get parent input. And that is like one of the most important things you could ever do. Ask them the right questions and get input, so we're working as a team. So the IEPs would have a bunch of, I like to use a blue marker, not a red marker, because a red marker was always like, oh man, I'm wrong again. So as a teacher, it was always a blue marker, and it was never like having 50 marks on the page. It was like, what are the most important things? So the IEP, I use that same strategy. I'm like, well, let's cross this out and let's just add this transition plan or a transition goal or accommodation. But it really showed that discussion. And I have authored an assessment, the dynamic assessment of social emotional learning, which is a strength-based assessment. It's informal. And that is something that, over my course of assessments for the past couple decades, always feeling odd with students who showed on paper that would ace these subtests for pragmatics and social language and all those things, who were the ones that were struggling the most. They were sitting under the stairs at lunch, sad, depressed, lonely, couldn't make a friend. Or the opposite, where kids seem to connect with classmates, ask for support in class, but then bomb the pragmatics piece. And then we were creating goals and present levels that would teach them to be inauthentic. And I was like, none of this is like really flowing with me. And the other thing is, during assessments, some days for all of us, we are like ready to go. We're engaged, we're regulated, we're like, let's do this. And other days we're just like, for a variety of reasons, maybe we have no fatigue, we didn't get to sleep the night before, maybe something happened first period, whatever it could be, our days fluctuated, right? And so then I wasn't really getting accurate standardized scores based on that, plus testing anxiety, a whole host of issues. And so that's why the assessment piece is so important, because if you have the right assessment and the right present levels, then writing neuroaffirming goals becomes so much easier, because you're working with input from the families, input from the providers on campus, and getting student input, and then with what you're observing as well. The other thing that I currently work on is my fiance and I, Jessie, she goes by the CCC-SLP. We created many years ago a podcast called the NeuroAffirm podcast. We changed the name, but the NeuroAffirm podcast, gosh, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago. Neurodiversity affirming techniques were really prominent, but I didn't like typing out neurodiversity affirming, even though I do it here. And also I thought it was just like, it made more sense with the word neuro. All of us, you watching this, we've had to go through rigorous course study, right? And learn neurology 101, neuroscience. We learned about neurologists. I'm like, neuro being brain, and then affirming, like we want to understand that what's going on beyond what was measurable, right? What's going on internally? What's that internal experience? So neuroaffirming made sense. So I ended up filing a patent and trademarking that. I did that like 3 years ago, and it can take forever. But anyway, so we have the neuroaffirm.com, which is a directory, and NeuroAffirm podcast. All things NeuroAffirm coming in the next year. So that's a little bit of history with me. And we have some objectives for today that we're going to talk about. We'll give some examples, but really here's where the beauty of all of this. Let me hide this down here too. That way it's not in anybody's way. I don't know if I can hide that piece or if you can see it, but too bad. When it comes to traditional or historical goals that we've written, we're gonna look at that and figure out how we can reframe it, right? So the other thing is we're gonna identify some language. What are some best practices that can really help make the student feel safe and connected, where we can target and prioritize the student's well-being and work on creating goals that don't inadvertently make things more difficult for the student. Sometimes we don't know it, but when reaching out to families, we ask, what are the 3 priorities for your child? And overwhelmingly responses are, I want my child to have a friend, have somebody they're connected with, right? I want my child to be as independent as possible, and I want my child to be happy. Those 3 things, right? So if we try to target those goals by what we view of just get out there and make a friend and initiate a conversation, all of a sudden you're going to have a friend. And then if you have a friend, then you're going to be happy. And then if you're happy, then you can be more independent. We just don't see that, right? We have the same goals going on for years and years. The families are coming to us saying, look, we've worked on these things, and they're still now freshman year sad or lonely or depressed, or they don't have a friend to hang out with on the weekend, or nobody they can text or call. They only have their friends that they've connected in Roblox with, or whatever it might be. So we're going to look on how we can create effective goals that work for students. And then that last piece I just kind of mentioned, but the main areas that we want to focus on, right? So what might a goal look like? And I'm going to give you exact details on what these goals look like, exact examples that you can use tomorrow. So what if IEP goals, this is the question we ask ourselves, what if the IEP goals we think will make autistic students successful are actually setting them up for anxiety, masking, and burnout? That's the question. Now, here is a story. If you were invited to a wedding with your significant other or friend, right? And you get to the wedding, what's the first thing that we do? We look at the big poster of where we're going to be for dinner. What table are we sitting at? That's like the very first thing before we go to the bar. Now imagine if the minister or somebody from the family comes over and says, we have a new plan. And the plan is that you, just you and only you, have to sit at a different table. We're going to put you over at table 4. You don't know anybody there. During your time at that table, you have to initiate a conversation, and it can't be about a topic that you prefer. Okay. It can't be a preferred topic. It has to be about something that you think that the other person might be interested in. And then during that, you have to make sure that you're making eye contact for 3 seconds. It has to be for 2 to 3 minutes, and make sure you're asking follow-up questions to keep the conversation reciprocal, back and forth. Oh my God, what would happen? First off, you'd go straight to get a shot of Patron. Second thing, you would say, I'd never want to go to a wedding again, because that type of approach puts ourselves into a setting where we have to hide who we are, or fake laughing at the table, or fake talking about a conversation we don't want to. It's going to lead to more anxiety and stress. And then if we continue to do that over time, specifically therapy on a weekly basis, working on those, we're going to get burnt out. We're going to be at max capacity. We're going to be fatigued. We are going to have so much stress and anxiety that it's going to send us the wrong way. So those are some things to consider when we're writing these goals. Is it going to set this kid up for more stress, more social withdrawal, right? So we can reframe all of that, and we can support students. That's the key. I'm going to show you a video, and this video is a video that helps reframe our thoughts, because traditionally we were taught something through college books, through text, through whatever our source of learning might be. And at some point in life, we step back, we unlearn what we learned, then we relearn, and that's how we grow. So this is a story called the Man Gulch Fire. It happened nearly 60 years ago. It's a 1.5 minutes long. So watch this video, and then we'll follow up with some more context.
In 1949, a forest fire broke out in Man Gulch, Montana. Smoke jumpers were parachuted in a team of 15 headed by a foreman named Wag Dodge. The fire exploded. It was moving over 600 feet a minute, faster than most people can ever run, and so 15 firefighters were trapped. Wag Dodge had an idea. He knew that they would lose the race back to the top of the ridge, so he suddenly stopped. He lit a match, and he lit a fire at his own feet, and the fire spread around him. I imagine the other smoke jumpers thought the guy was crazy, but his idea was this: if I burn the fuel around me, then when the fire comes and overtakes me, I'm safe. I'll be in what came to be known as an escape fire. He tried to get the other smoke jumpers to join him, and nobody did. The fire overtook the crew, killing 13 men and burning 3,200 acres. Wag Dodge survived, nearly unharmed, in his escape fire. It's just tragic to think of the answer being there, but just in the moment, not able to see it. That's how embedded people get in the status quo. They can't recognize an invention when it's among them, and they can't give up their old habits.
I'm going to stop right there. But essentially, everything he was taught when it came to not being able to fight the fire when it got so big was to run as fast as you can away from it, keep your equipment on, and he did the opposite. He was the only one that survived, drops down, lights a fire around him so it burns all the brush, and then the fire comes over. He gets his oxygen from putting his face down into the dirt, and was the only one out of that fire. Now, when we learn things, sometimes we are 100% thinking that we have it right until we realize we didn't have it right. And I think that's really how it comes in with working with our neurodivergent students, right? whether it's a fluency disorder, or we're working with an ADHDer, or we're working with an autistic student, it's like, what's going on beyond what we can see at the surface level, so we can come and help and affirm that social communication might have some differences. Executive functioning might look different for certain people. And how can we provide those supports? Having different sensory needs, having different problem solving and perspectives with double empathy, all sorts of things that help us reframe ways that we can understand at a neurological level, so we could create the most effective plan for a student. So that's really how it goes. The power of unlearning what you know, then letting go of the past beliefs, and then to relearn and grow. That's what we have to do. Sometimes we have to let go of what we thought was best practice in order to grow. I hear that all the time. It's got to be evidence-based research, which I agree with, right? But sometimes evidence-based research, even if it's outdated, evidence-based research might not be the best approach. And so we do a practice-based evidence approach, right? I always think like that. Someone tells me, yeah, but it's evidence-based practice. I'm like, yeah, but so is asbestos in houses. Like, we found that research showed that we can prevent fires by putting asbestos in houses because there was evidence to prove so. Until years went on, and it created a lot of major health complications, to where I think maybe up until last year is finally banned in all of the products getting put into houses. But that's really after unlearning the old stuff. So we don't want goals that suppress natural characteristics and traits, right? Being able to dive into special interest, being able to have a lengthier conversation, and back and forth ping pong type communication might not be the goal. We don't want to teach students that they have to hide who they are, because I get masking to a point where if you get a certain gift from grandma and you don't like it, you can say, oh, I like it. So we're protecting grandma's feelings, but then grandma's going to get the same gift anyway. So there's really not, other than for safety and the nuances I mentioned here, we really want to aim to how we can advocate and meet the needs to where we're building authentic conversations and connections, and friendships happen organically. You would want that, and I would want that, and our students that we work with want that. So what does it mean for a goal to be neurodiversity affirming? So how can we do this? So one of the things that we can do is make sure that it's supporting authentic communication. So authentic communication, don't even know if I said the word communication right. Authentic communication can mean what's natural for somebody. If they're into watching demon hunters, K-pop demon hunters, then we create an opportunity during their time, because speech is their time, not ours, right? So we can dive into the topic, and we can explore it, and we can learn some new things, and we can create situations where their peers can also bring in their interest, right? And that's where we really see the growth happen. And whatever's natural for them, it's not forced. Like, okay, now it's your turn to add a thought. Okay, now it's your turn to add a thought. Let the conversations happen naturally. Now, I know what you might be thinking. How do you measure that? We'll talk about that in several slides from now, and I'll show you exactly how I do it. An ND-affirming goal and an ND-affirming IEP should always prioritize mental health and well-being. We have to create an IEP where the very first thing is a felt sense of safety. Because if a child's coming into school and they don't either have the accommodations or modifications or IEP plan that's making them feel safe, or they don't have goals that don't align with who they are, then all we're doing is creating a situation where it's like sitting in a chair on the back two legs. You know that feeling you get right before the chair falls, and there's that whoosh of anxiety? Imagine feeling that throughout your whole day, right? Some of our kids feel that whoosh of anxiety literally for like 8 hours straight being here. And you're not in your optimal learning zone when that happens. You're not within your window of tolerance. You're not feeling regulated. So you're decreasing your ability to grow your language and vocabulary and ability to develop your confidence, which then in turn ties into your ability to advocate for more supports or advocating for what doesn't feel right. Like, hey, I don't want to go to the homecoming rally. It's going to be a little loud. Is there alternative places I can go, or whatever it might be? So again, a felt sense of safety. That's what the IEP should really aim for. I mentioned that to families, or if there's a bigger meeting where the families might bring in some support, if you've been in those meetings, to where it's like a recommendation from the IEE, the individual education evaluation, is like filled with neurotypical social skills goals. And then it's requested of speech 3 times a week to work on those goals. It's like, well, are we prioritizing the child's well-being? And then we talk about how masking leads to anxiety and stress and depression. We talk about, are all of these goals and this type of recommendation prioritizing mental health, or are we teaching the kid to be inauthentic, right? That's the driving conversation. And that's how we get people listening, because no family wants that. They want what's going to make their child, again, those 3 things, but how do we get there? Well, they want their child to feel regulated during the day, right? We could say that for feeling happy. We want their child to be connected and have a sense of community. And that might just be from sitting down at lunch with one other person, parallel play, not having a back and forth conversation, but just having somebody, right? And then gaining some of those skills so they can advocate. So not always an independence, but it could be codependence. It could be like, hey, I need you to support me to do this thing. And that's really important. A neurodiversity affirming goal will respect the special interest. And rather than having a token system or a star system where the kid has to keep their hands in their lap and they have to stay quiet and still the whole time, and then they have to earn stickers before they can get to their special interest, it's just going to create more dysregulation. So especially for us as speech therapists, we have the opportunity and options to create a setting, create an environment, and a therapy approach where we can tie in some of these special interests. That's intrinsically motivating. And then if it's not special interest, we can build on intrinsic motivation by providing some choice and some autonomy and providing some mastery. So getting better at something and then getting their own feedback on it. We'll talk about measuring goals because it all ties into that. And then having a sense of purpose, coming to speech, connecting with others, all of that ties into intrinsic motivation. And then the last thing is writing these goals, you're going to know it. This either feels good or it doesn't feel so good, right? There's been goals for many years of where maybe, I don't know about you, but like there was, goal banks and things out there where it's like, man, I don't really want to work on this goal. And because it doesn't feel good. It's like, this is just awkward. It makes me feel weird. Or there's been some IEP goals where I read them and I'm like, what does that mean? Like I'm having to get out ChatGPT to say, what does this goal mean? I'm like the SLP, right? If I don't know what it means, how is the parent or the kid going to know what it means? So that's it. Feels good for families and providers. All right. Before we dive into this next topic, or not next topic, but this next video, this is one of the driving things that also helped me select groups and work on certain goals. It ties into the double empathy problem. This particular video is called Diversity and Social Intelligence. Essentially, the findings in the research is that when you have an autistic student with another autistic student, there doesn't really seem to be breakdown. You probably notice that in your small groups. You're like, hey, if I just sit back, sometimes these kids, even though their conversation might look different, maybe one's info dumping and giving a lot of information and somebody else is just listening, it might look different than an allistic or a non-autistic way of communicating, but it's equally as valid. That's important. But what the findings show is that once you take the autistic neurotype with an allistic neurotype or a non-autistic neurotype and cross paths, usually what happens is the neurotypical or the non-autistic view is that person has a social deficit. And that's where everything falls apart, is inaccurate way of looking at it. It's like the that thing that I showed you with the video where everything we learned could be wrong. And so this is a really important one. Let's check it out.
The The study that we're running is to look at social intelligence in autism. We were interested to find out whether there are differences in how autistic people interact with other autistic people than to how they interact with non-autistic people.
Okay, so we'll all just make towers, so I'm going to give you each. We decided to focus in on information transfer, so the way in which people transmit information to each other. 8 people came in and essentially you would teach the first person in the chain something and they would demonstrate it to the next person in the chain and so on for 8 people.
So we've had groups of people who are autistic, we've had groups of people who are non-autistic, and we've had groups of people that have had both autistic and non-autistic people in them. And in those chains, we've alternated between a non-autistic person and an autistic person in the chain. One of the inclusion criteria that we had was that people who were participating had to have an IQ of more than 70. And the reason that we did that is because this is a very new, very experimental piece of research, and we wanted to minimize the amount of noise in the data.
What we found was that an information transfer between autistic people is just as effective as information transfer between non-autistic people.
The clinical diagnosis has been and still is that autism is at its core something that causes real deficits in communication with other people and social interaction. What we've found is that autistic people have just as good interactions with other autistic people as non-autistic people do. When we have autistic and non-autistic people together, we see this drop in scores, this drop in rapport, this drop in data transfer.
So 2 neurotypical people will experience relatively high rapport, 2 autistic people will experience relatively high rapport, and a pair of autistic and neurotypical people will have a little bit lower.
We found from kind of multiple lines of evidence in our research that we need to rethink what we mean by social deficits in autism, because we have found that it is a selective deficit that occurs when interacting with non-autistic people, and that's a really important finding.
So we'll stop there on that video, but as I mentioned earlier, that's how I group my students. I get a Google Doc, I consider neurotype, I look at primary eligibility, I go, okay, these are my autistic students, and then I think, I try to gather information from the assessment that I have of what are their interests, what do they like, what are they looking for in a friend, all sorts of things. And then based on interest and based on who I think would work well, that creates my small social groups where conversations can happen naturally, friendships can happen organically, and that's where the beauty of it all comes in. I want to mention some myths versus truths about neuroaffirming goals, right? So there's a myth that if we're just looking at autism being a difference, then we're not going to be looking at helping the student. And that couldn't be more inaccurate. What it really does is when we can look at someone, if somebody has a difference of their way of communicating to where it impacts them in the social world, where it's hard to connect with a peer, it's hard to advocate for needs, it's hard to get people to understand that sometimes environments can be overwhelming and stressful when everyone's talking at once, bright lights, loud sounds, right? So when we have that viewpoint, then it's a much more effective viewpoint than just ignoring challenges. We're looking at it from an internal experience, right? The other thought is it's a myth that neurodiversity affirming approaches or goals won't help kids in the real world. What really they're talking about is it's not going to help them outside of school. But the idea is that we're not teaching masking. We're looking at long-term mental health support. We're looking at prioritizing well-being and getting that emotional support. So what it's doing is the approach that we're coming in with is saying, hey, look, we are going to approach this by honoring who you are and whatever your interests are. And if you communicate differently, we'll honor that. But here's also some tools to help you navigate the social world. So that way, some of those challenging situations aren't so challenging. Another myth, you can't teach kids social communication. I hear that. They're like, well, if not social skills, then how are they ever going to be able to, hear these words, not what I say, but how are they ever going to function if we're not teaching them social skills? It's like we can teach them about their neurodivergent social differences and some additional tools to advocate for how to get needs met in class What accommodations can be supportive? What types of friends might blossom into a long-term friendship? What's the difference between an acquaintance and a close friend? What might this person be thinking in this situation? So we're not stripping away autonomy, but we're providing some differences of perspective. So the reality is all we're doing is, instead of teaching NT or neurotypical social skills, we're reframing that as we're teaching a student about their neurodivergent social differences or social skills. And those are going to be more targeted towards advocacy. And those are going to be much better for the kids because they're not going to feel like they're having to fake it till they make it. They're not stressed out about going to speech. They're not withdrawing socially from school or from groups. And the last belief, students won't qualify or receive funding if we're only looking at it as differences, which isn't true at all. Really, what ends up happening is we're describing what the student's strengths are and who they are, right? Rather than pathologizing them. So that way we can write up what are some ways that can support them so they can get the supports and services. So for example, instead of saying the students perseverating on the Minecraft movie, they're always moving their hands, they don't make eye contact. Instead of saying that, we're reframing it by saying student is passionate about Minecraft. That's what helps them connect with other peers and have conversations that feel natural to them. They prefer listening without being forced to make eye contact to help them process the language better. You see how that little simple reframe can still, what we describe about the child can give them the supports without pathologizing them. I'll give you some more case studies and examples as we're coming up to exactly what that might look like in a goal, and then how we can measure that. So we're going to examine traditional goals. During group instruction, student will be able to gain attention of communication partner by physically moving closer, orienting their body towards them, and maintaining adequate eye contact. What's the problem with that type of goal? Well, there's like a bunch. Forcing eye contact may cause sensory overload, might feel uncomfortable, could lead to physical pain that has been reported. It could make listening and comprehending more challenging because they're only focusing on making eye contact, right? So eye contact goal, I know that's been talked about a lot online, so we're not going to spend too much time on that. Moving close to someone may be difficult for students processing their needs. Like forcing somebody into a group right next to somebody else is not the most comfortable situation. It could increase anxiety and lead to masking. And then the last thing, it's compliance-based. We try to get away from compliance-based, right? We want students to learn how to advocate for their needs. This is for high support needs kids with different ways of communicating. Maybe they communicate through a device, but all of these things we look at. So another traditional goal, when provided with video clips to model desired social skills, student will accurately imitate the individuals depicted in the video clips. A polite greeting, ask previously rehearsed questions, so on and so forth. So we do have some packaged things out there. I'm not trying to knock any particular program. I'm just saying that showing a student, here's how a person says hi. Hi, Bob. Bob says hi back. Hi, my name's Ted. Hi, Ted, I'm Bob. And then the conversation stops, right? It doesn't really help. The problem is it's teaching kids to mask. It makes them feel uncomfortable. It puts emphasis on compliance instead of prioritizing the student well-being. So one last one before we get into our specific scenarios. When given activities to work on social skills, student will improve their tone of voice and will have a conversational exchange on a peer's chosen topic. Earlier, we talked about that, the level of stress of having to go back and forth and retain information. We've got episodic and working memory differences and challenges. So why is this, what's the problem with this type of goal with conversational exchange, tone of voice? It invalidates autistic communication styles, right? Sometimes some of our students prefer just to be a listener. Sometimes some students like to give a lot of details about their favorite subject or something they saw on TV. So they like to drop a lot of knowledge. Some people call it info dumping. I just like to say data sharing, whatever works for you, right? So the other problem with this is it communicates to the student that their areas of interest are unimportant. So they're constantly going out, being hypervigilant. Did I say the right thing? Did I not say the right thing? Did I ask a follow-up question? Did I not ask a follow-up question? Should I talk about my special interest? Should I not? And constantly doing that through the whole day. By the time they get home, they explode because they're so exhausted and their cup is full. So it tips over and boom. It's so these types of goals, working on tone of voice doesn't honor autistic characteristics, and conversational exchange could increase frustration. I already talked about how it could just be the tip of the iceberg, right? It could just be the thing that knocks over the last block in Jenga. So the other thing to really consider is, why should a peer always be the one to get to choose the topic? Why can't the student get to have that conversation? So what are some key areas that we can focus on to create neurodiversity affirming goals? So I'm going to give you 2 specific examples that you might see, because these are ones that come up fairly common in the schools. What are they? What's going on? And then ways to help. So some of the ideas for what we include in the goals, I like to put this in the actual IEP goal. Or if you're in a private practice, I like this. So during preferred activities, during discussions where the student can talk about their special interest or their areas of passion, right? Just that alone helps us remove the compliance. It helps us bring in what's authentic to the kid. Using total communication methods. I like that because there's so much emphasis on verbal speech, but sometimes some of our kids would prefer to write it down. Some kids would like to use gestures and pointing. Those are all maybe a device. Everything is a valid way of communicating. What works for one person might look different for the next person. I like to put this in my IEP goals. Again, I don't put all of this in one goal, just what works for you. When regulated and supported, right? So when the child is in their optimal window, within their zone of feeling regulated, and when they're getting that support, they'll advocate, or they'll learn how to advocate, or they'll work on perspective taking, or they'll develop expressive language skills, or whatever it is. We're working on making sure the priority is the student feeling regulated. And then last, co-regulation, having an adult or a safe person in the building or on campus, right? Who's the trusted person? And then we can tie in those co-regulation supports into the goal. What they do is they center connection. The goals value the student's interest. They honor the communication differences and all of this leads to positive self-identity. If you have a positive self-identity, you've probably worked with some students who are like, I don't want to talk about autism. I hate autism. I don't even want it, right? You have those kids. So over time, we work on being different is okay. And because you're a perfectly fine zebra and not a broken horse, here's some strategies that we're working on here. So that way your classes and beyond the school becomes easier for you to navigate. You don't have to disclose that you're autistic to anybody, but it's nice to know that, hey, that's why some of these situations might be more challenging. What are the supports I can do to help? So we start to build that self-confidence, that positive self-identity. And when you can have that, then is the next step of the ladder, which is now I feel comfortable enough to advocate for my needs. So we got a student, he eats lunch alone, right? So this is for a lot of students. This isn't any particular student, but we have a student. Oh, and by the way, this is AI generated. I generated this photo. And so I don't want you thinking that this is like some kid that I took a picture of. But a student eats lunch alone. He says that he's lonely. He's been saying at lunch, I don't have any friends, but I would like a friend. The parent reports that they've had many years of social skills in elementary school, but we're not having a friend really or anybody connect with the student. You've probably heard that before, right? And you're like, what do I do? How can I help this type of child? Because you're right. Like we look at these goals and it's like, sure, we've met the expected and unexpected goals, and we've met the initiating conversation, and we've met the 3 to 4 conversational exchange, and they're still not meeting somebody and feeling lonely and withdrawing from school. So what do? We have to think about how we can help the student from a neuroaffirming lens. So we talk about interest, right? Those passions, those special interests, and we learn about them. What are they? Does a kid like video games? I've got a Nintendo Wii in my office. Do they like anime? We can do this on the intake too, or on the assessment. I use the DASL for this, but whatever form you have, just to get to know the kid. Are they into wrestling? Do they know that John Cena is wrapping up his final days of a wrestler? Like, what are those interests, right? And then we can dive into their world. Then what we can do is during these discussions, we can play games together. We can have something ready that would be fun with no pressure, right? Jenga might be a little bit of a pressure, but it's kind of fun to have it all set up. Like, hey, you want to play a game of Jenga? If they say yes, then boom, build it. If not, hey, I've got these other ideas. Minecraft magnetic blocks, freedom to be flexible and build whatever. Have some collaborative games where there's no winner, or there is a winner, but it's you and your other players against the game, right? So there's no loser, I should say. You either all win together or you all lose together. And then the last thing is you, as I mentioned, with that diversity and social intelligence, try to figure out which students could mesh well with that student. Maybe it's one student, maybe it's two. Who are their allies? Who are the people that share similar interest with? And then the IEP goal would look like this. The IEP goal would be an expressive communication and friendship goal. I sometimes don't put friendship in the IEP, but I could put it in the notes section of the goal, or maybe in the baseline of the goal, right? So when participating in activities that align with the student's natural communication style, the student will develop expressive communication skills to connect with a classmate or a peer or an ally over shared interest, which fosters natural organic friendships, natural conversations. And then we measure it not by a percentage. I never measure by percentage, because how do you know if the kid is authentically connecting with the classmate during third period? How do you know at lunch if they're expressing or having those conversations or whatever the skill is? So the rubric can look like this, where we get our baseline data. The student is able, you could sit there and say, okay, where are we at right now? And then this becomes your baseline. And then your goal essentially is, where are we at the end of the year, right? So we're setting our objectives up with a 6 out of 12, then a 7 out of 12 on the rubric, and then an 8 out of 12 over your objectives. But this is much more motivating for a student. They can actually visually see how they are performing. You can take these types of things and talk to the teachers. Hey, where are we at in this class with this? So we can see if we're making some progress, and it's natural to the student, and everybody wins when you have that. So here's another situation. Now, this is an isolated situation that can go well beyond this, but I work with teens. And it's inevitable that every year during homecoming or prom, or just freshman year in general, and then out of all the grades, people just want to start dating, right? Like, I have interest in a classmate. So it's like, here's a scenario. A student really likes a classmate that they've known. They're just an acquaintance, but they went to middle school with the student, right? And the student, I think I wrote this backward. The student wants the girl to be his girlfriend, right? Or vice versa. And he's like, okay, I really want that girl to be my girlfriend. When they tell me that, I'm like, wait, does she know that she wants you to be the girlfriend? Like, how well do you know this girl? So that's what I always try to figure this out. But he wants to write her a note and give her flowers, then ask her to the dance during lunch. Okay. So over the years of me working with students, sometimes students will save their lunch money and then go up to somebody and say, here's $100. Will you be my girlfriend? That doesn't work. And if it does work, it's not going to be a long lasting relationship. I don't think. I'm not going to knock it that it doesn't, but that's just been my experience. So in this situation, a lot of times our students aren't even aware, like, hey, just because it's a classmate doesn't mean that you're a close friend, or even that person's perspective is that you know them that well. So that's where we start. Like, how well do you know this person? This is the same thing with online communication, like on the DMs or whatever it might be. We work on perspective taking, but we also don't want to take away their autonomy and choice. So my job is to sit down and say, okay, let's walk through the scenarios, right? I'm not here to tell you what to do or what not to do. I know you told me that you want to write a note and give it to them and drop down on your knees by saying, will you go to the dance with me? But I also want to give you some background information on how well do you know this person? Are they already going or not? Like, gather more information and give me the situation. So we work on that part. And then this is a really, really important one, is in all settings, whether it's through videos, movies, Netflix shows, YouTube clips, handouts, activities that I've created, we work on multiple perspectives and multiple possibilities, right? So in this situation, hey, she could be thrilled. She'd be like, oh, this is awesome. Could be neutral. Or she could be like, nope, I don't know this person. Please keep your distance. But we don't know that information, right? We can't just say, hey, we have big feelings and we want to take action on them right now. We got to think about these things. And then we work on consent, right? How many times is too many times on asking the person or texting the person? How close is too close to be sitting next to them? What does staring look like versus not staring? What does it look like if we start circling around campus to walk in front of them to pass them every day? There's a lot of variables, right? So I'm trying to keep this like on a big picture lens to help. But this is what a goal might look like. So on that scenario, this could work with so many other situations that happen. And I know that you've probably encountered this as well. So that's why I'm trying to target you with this goal. When given multi-perspective activities or reflecting on real events, right? Because this is a real event, the student will improve their perspective taking skills in various situations. I would sometimes include without sacrificing autonomy, but sometimes you don't want to confuse the parent on these goals. But so student will improve their perspective taking skills in various situations by demonstrating the ability to reflect on their own actions and consider the perspectives of others, right? A lot of times, whether it's ADHD and impulsive or not understanding that, hey, my thought and that person's thought might be different. We want to honor those, but we also want to make sure that we have boundaries and consent and perspectives all aligned so everybody feels safe. So that's what that goal looked like. And we would measure it again on a rubric, right? So the student would sit down and we could watch video clips or we can talk about it of what might that person's be thinking. Let's write them all down. Okay, how do you feel you're doing? And then we give our input. And then sometimes I'll send stuff like this home to the families as well and picking their brain on what seems to where are we at on this form right now when it comes to where your child's at. So that lets us know. Sorry, I've been talking a lot. I need to drink some water. So here's the deal. The nice thing about the way we're tracking goals with these rubrics is that if we are in more of a contentious meeting or adversarial meeting, or we're just in a meeting that we know we have to have all of our ducks lined up in a row, we can have data, baseline. Where was the student? What's the progress been look like? And then we can get multiple providers and stakeholders input on how the student's doing in a variety of contexts, including the student's input. So now we're making this goal effective and a holistic approach, right? So we're looking at approaching this through all of those areas. So I feel like that is definitely the way to go. The other goal that I would tie into working with students when it comes to sometimes perspective taking, that can sometimes extend to things that aren't talked about, which is like advocacy and consent. So like it's not uncommon for my freshmen to have a PE. All of them have PE when they get to high school. I don't know if that's through all of the states or I'm sure it is, but like PE could be challenging if it's hot out and it's a swim lesson and all of a sudden everyone's dressed in their swimsuits. Because every once in a while I've had to deal with working with, I shouldn't say I have to deal with, but I've had to support students in understanding that we can't make certain comments about other people when they're in their bathing suit. We can't stare. We can't do all of those things, right? We didn't get consent from somebody. And here's the reasons why we can't do that. Like, we work on perspectives. What might the teacher be thinking? What might that other student be thinking? And then we navigate it. Yeah. And then the other thing too, it could be advocacy and consent in class with situations. Like, it's not uncommon for me to get a phone call saying, hey, I had a student who was really close to another student to where their hand's always rubbing on the other person, and they're standing behind them. And then during passing period, they're purposely walking around so they can get in that person's pathway. They don't know the person that well. They're not saying anything, but it's been informed to me. And I'm like, shoot, this is where we're working on perspective. We're working on how to advocate for our needs. We're working on consent, both for ourselves and for others. Because this is a really important one as we are diving into these types of goals. So I'm going to read this, and then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we can track this type of goal as well. So let's jump into that. Okay, so the goal that we're going to be targeting, it sounds like this. The student will demonstrate self-advocacy skills by asking for consent before engaging in actions that may be sensitive or personal. So things such as like a topic that might throw some people off. We have that happen every once in a while. Talking about another person's appearance, physical interactions, all of those types of things. And then we can measure that on a on a rubric. Again, same style, same approach, easy way to conduct our baseline data that can go in the IEP or your reports. And when we're drafting these goals, I actually use the same type of language when I am creating my goals. I'll say something like, the student currently requires several prompts when recognizing situations for consent, and might require significant prompting when responding back to consent. Right? So that would be my baseline data. I'm just taking language out of the rubrics. All right, so let's jump to the next slide here. So circling all of this back around, why does this matter? So it helps empower students. It gives them the tools that they need, the self-advocacy skills, the things that align with who they are. It helps connect them through shared interest and not just scripted conversations. It includes the student, includes the families. What we're doing is we're considering this from a holistic viewpoint, the whole child, not isolated events. I want to really discuss that part too. Every once in a while, we'll get those standardized scores from subtest, and there might be a request of, well, we need a goal for that, for that, for that. We're not doing that because the student doesn't come down just to one subtest score. We're looking at the whole child. And that's how we're creating these goals. What we're trying to do is we're trying to do our best to reduce, sorry about that typo there. We're trying to reduce overload and overwhelm. And we want to make sure that we're creating goals and IEPs that help the student feel safe and regulated and have the tools to navigate life beyond here. As we wrap it up, those goals that I had showed with these rubrics, I have several dozen of these goals, all organized into friendship, connection, self-advocacy, perspective taking. And this is all part of my assessment that I talked about. If you're interested and you don't have a copy of this, this is the QR code, or you could just head to speechdude.com and check it out. It'll give you a lot more detailed information. But I figured, hey, you might be thinking, well, I love those goals and I love those rubrics. I need more. I need activities that tie directly into some of these goals so I can work with the students. So you'll find all of that right up here. And that's on my website. There's 4 forms for collecting information from teachers, from the caregiver, from yourself, and from the student, and with sample reports and the whole 9 yards. So those are the ways that we approach IEPs. We write goals based on all of those things. If you can follow the guidelines here, check out the handouts and use this, you'll really be sharpening your tool for when it comes to writing goals that support and honor who your students are. And I think that with these, when you can have goals that are written in a way that support the students and they feel good about them, and you write goals and you feel good about them, that's going to create a situation for the therapy process where your social groups will go well, your activities and games will really sparkle, right? They'll really shine. The kids will really thrive if you have the right present levels, because that drives the right goals, and the right goals drive the right services, and everybody feels good about it. So I hope that you found this valuable. If you're not already following me, this is where you can find me on social media, or on, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. This is my website that is currently continuously being updated with some really neat tools. And I have some great activity stuff coming out, but always feel free to reach out if you need to get in touch with me. I hope that you found this engaging and fun. I hope that you found this insightful. I hope that this changes the game for you, because now you have some tools that you can walk into these IEP meetings, or even for yourself if you're in private practice too. Get up to the plate and hit some grand slams. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate your time, and I want you all to stay legendary. All right. We'll see you.